Okay, great. I call to, order or welcome everybody to the workshop tonight. And we're going to hand this over to our city attorney.
Thank you, Mayor. I had been asked or requested to put together some stuff on the Open Records Act and the Open Meetings Act, or what's commonly known, the second one, Open Meetings Act, the Sunshine Law. As I had stated earlier, the purpose of this is not to attempt to make anyone an expert on the Open Records Act or the Open Meetings Act. I'd just like to discuss a few bullet points and maybe give you some examples that might be of help to you in this area, maybe some things you may have thought about, may not have thought about. I'm going to start with the Open Records Act because I can get through that really quick, not that it's not important. But the Open Records Act is not something that this board or any other legislative board is going to run into on a consistent basis, primarily because they don't walk around with stacks and stacks of open records. The Open Records Act says that all records kept by the government, state, county, city, whatever, are subject to being viewed, copied if they want, by any citizen of the state of Tennessee. But the reason you don't run into it is those requests are normally made to the records clerk or the records custodian, and the only time that you would hear about it would be if something really went really badly wrong and the city was going to have to defend an action for either not providing it or taking the position that you are not entitled to it. Just because you have an Open Records Act, the statute does say that there are certain things that are not subject to open records, and most of those, some of them are constitutional, some of them are by the legislature. I'll just point out a few examples. Ongoing criminal investigations are not subject to the Open Records Act. Last legislature, maybe the one before, said that the names of people who have carry permits are not open records. Your medical records are not open records. That's by statute in the state, and also probably would run afoul of the HIPAA Act. That type of thing is not available. Anything else, just because it might be embarrassing, unfortunately that's open for anyone to see and copy if they so desire. A couple of things I'd like to mention on that, and then we'll get on to the Sunshine Law and the Open Meetings Law. The open records can be a real source of not only embarrassment, but it can be financially troubling and financially taxing. If there are certain things, and I'm not going to try to go into them in great detail, but the people who ask for copies of open records, statute provides that they can be charged for those. You can charge for the labor for assembling those. After you give them the first hour, there is a maximum that you can charge per page depending on what type of size, et cetera, it is. If you have to send something out special and have it copied, you can, as the city, can collect for that specific item. You are required, if there's, usually if you're talking about 8.5 by 11 type things, it's pretty easy to do, but if the person comes in and wants a bulk record type thing, you need to give them an estimate of what it would be for the time. If there's something that's really strange about the copying, you need to find out what it's going to cost you to get it done and pass that along to them before, and you can actually collect for those before you have to copy them. The Touchstone's case on that came many years ago when this first was introduced to the public. Is a case called Newspaper Printing Corporation versus Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County, the Electric Power Board doing business as Nashville Electric Service. The bottom line of the thing was the Newspaper Printing Corporation wanted to get the names and addresses of people from the Power Board's power supply list, the customers that had electric bills, and they didn't contest the fact that they could have it, but there was some type of format that they kept those in, and Newspaper Printing Corporation was maintaining that you've got to give them to me in the format that I want it in, and that went to court and was beat around for several months, and finally it came back. That conversion bill was going to be somewhere around $100,000, And the Power Board took the position that if you'll give me the $100,000, we'll send it out and have it converted for you. Well, the courts decided that, said, yes, you've been given access to those in the form that they keep them in. You cannot force the business to keep records in a form that you want them in. The other big case that went around the state came out of Chattanooga and involved, apparently the city of Chattanooga and this person had been at some differences for some time, but they had apparently filed a request for some boxes of sewer records. And that's one of the things in the statute. You've got 7 working days to produce the records for the people, or where they can come and copy them, or mark them where you copy them, or whatever. And if you can't do that, the only thing you need to do is give them a written estimate as to how long it'll take, and as long as it's reasonable, you're okay. But Chattanooga didn't do this. The lady that normally conducted this type of thing was on vacation or sick or something, was out for a pretty good while, some 30-some-odd days, and they didn't respond. Then when she came back, they still didn't give them an estimate of when they would get them, so she sues them for the records and her attorney's fees for having to get them that the statute provides. And this was fought through the courts for several months, but bottom line was that they provided the records. They were going to do that. They didn't give her an estimate of when they were going to do it, which gave her the right to sue and ask for attorney's fees. And by the time it went to the Court of Appeals, et cetera, it cost the city about $100,000. And they still got the records. The learning point, the bullet point is that if you get one of these requests and you can't do it in the statutory required time, then by all means, please communicate with them how long it's going to take you to do it, an estimate when you're going to do it. And if you don't have it done by that time, you produce the ones you've got and tell them how long it's going to take to complete the thing. That's about all I had proposed to say on the Open Records Act, other than the fact that it's not just the citizens of that city, any citizen of that state. There has been some stuff that says you don't have to entertain the ones that's out of state. Maybe you would, but that's not what our statute says. The other part is the open records, the open meetings law, sometimes called the Sunshine Law, and that's codified at, let me give you the statute citation for the Open Records Act. I meant to do that. It's at TCA 10-7-503 is where it starts. The Sunshine Law, or the Open Meetings Act, is codified at TCA 844-102 through 8106, and I'm not going to read a lot of the stuff to you. The statute is relatively short, and I would, for accuracy, probably read that, but I mean, you can read the statute as well as I can. I just want to point out what it says and some of the bullet points that I'd want to leave with you. And then hopefully at the end I'll have a little time to direct you to a couple of cases that I think would be of some help to you in observing and paying properly administering the Open Meetings Act. TCA 8-44-102 says, and I'm going to quote this, all meetings of any governing body are declared to be public meetings open to the public at all times except as provided by the Constitution of Tennessee. And then they go on to describe what a governing body is, and that's the members of any public body which consists of 2 or more members with the authority to make decisions for or recommendations to a public body on policy or administration. Now, that means not only the elected officials, but also any board that board sets up, i.e. planning commissions, tree boards, whatever, park boards, whatever they may be. And that applies to all governing bodies in the state of Tennessee that have been created by the legislature, i.e. the county legislative bodies, the city legislative bodies, and any sub-bodies. It does not apply to the state legislature. They are free to meet when they want, discuss what they want. The reason being that the statute that they passed doesn't apply to them. All of the county, city, municipal, etc. legislative bodies are creatures of either the state legislature, the county legislature, or the municipal legislature. The state legislature is a creation of the Constitution. Therefore, this does not apply to them. Not everything that you do, and this is as good a place to point it out as any, not everything that you do as a board is subject to the open meetings law, the Sunshine Law. It's only when you're conducting the public's business. Now, and anything you can't do sitting here, you can't do on some of our modern electronic means. You can't sit down and conduct a meeting by text, this type of thing. If you're prohibited from doing it in person here, you're prohibited from doing it by any other means. The mere exchange of information between board members without any comment of, I'm going to introduce this at the next meeting, or what do you think if I introduce this? If you truly are exchanging information, something you found out today that you thought everybody should know, here it is, take a look at it. That does not violate the Sunshine Law. It's only when you turn from exchanging information to starting to plan how you're going to use that information, how it might be used for the good of the community, or how it might, however, some people might not perceive it that way, but however you're going to use that as a board, then that is prohibited. I would say to you, I was asked one time, and there's no disrespect to that individual, he was concerned about it. Says if I'm in a restaurant somewhere having a meal and one of my fellow board members comes in and sits down, are we violating Sunshine Law? Absolutely not. Unless you sit there at that dining table and start discussing business of the city and how you're going to implement business of the city, you are not violating the Sunshine Law. If the board gets together and goes to a county legislative meeting, they haven't violated the Sunshine Law as long as you don't start discussing the city business and how you're going to implement it. I would point out to you that sometimes you get these things and you hear them that before a meeting somebody's over in the corner meeting with somebody. I would discourage those, even though if you're not doing anything that's planning how you're going to implement something in the city legislative meeting, you haven't violated the Sunshine Law, but everyone up here is aware of what the Court of Public Opinion does, and you can be guilty in the Court of Public Opinion when you haven't done anything. I will also point out to you that if I'm going to, anyone can challenge a violation of the Sunshine Law or prosecute a claim for that. And I'll go into in a minute what some of the things are. But if you do that, remember the person that does this, it's not an inquisition. The statute is a remedial statute, which means it is a broad statute. It's to be interpreted broadly by the courts to implement the purpose of the statute, rather than a strict constructionist that you get when you have a constitutional question. If it don't say it, it's not there. The broad construction is if we have anything to support it, then we've got to come down on the side of the statute. However, if I'm going to say you violated the Open Meetings Act, I still have a burden to establish that you were actually doing something that was in furtherance of how you were going to conduct business at the meeting, or soliciting information or soliciting support for your position. You did not, when you got elected to this board, in all due respect, you did not give up your citizenship. You did not give up your right, your constitutional right either. And the courts have said that, but I would again caution you, make sure that if you're discussing something that you're not, you're exchanging information, you're not formulating a plan to get something through the board. Section 844-103, we comply with that. That's the notice of regular meetings and notice of special meetings, that you must give notice as required by statute. If it's a regular meeting or if it's a special meeting, you must give notice that complies with your charter, the 12-hour notice, etc. I would digress on one thing, and I'm not going to give you a whole bunch of case stuff, just to point out how far that some of this stuff has gone. There is a case in this state where a legislative board had a workshop to discuss a rezoning issue. Excuse me, I came down with a summertime cold, and it's somewhat taken my voice at times, but they were discussing a rezoning issue in a workshop that was properly announced. And during the workshop, they just decided, since we've announced this, we'll go ahead and take a vote on the rezoning. And somebody, the citizens challenged it. I wouldn't recommend that you do that. It certainly is not proper procedure. But they did at the workshop elicit public comment. Apparently heard several citizens speak on the merits or demerits of the issue. And the court said that's not such a good idea, but you did advertise it. Anybody that wanted to be there had an opportunity to be there. They did take public comment, and we're going to let it stand. I would not suggest that you do that. I would certainly advise you not to do that. But I was a little bit taken aback by the fact that they did let it stand. Now, there is a provision that if you have done something and you realize afterwards that I made a mistake on this, we should not have been discussing this, you can have a public meeting, and you can cure that by simply bringing up the issue and have it open to discussion by the board, and if it requires public hearing, have the public there to do what they need to do. Everybody makes mistakes. But we would try to avoid those. And that's what the reason for 844-103 is. 844-104 is a statute that requires that at any call meeting of the board that is subject to the public, that excludes executive sessions, that minutes will be kept, they will be recorded, they will be available for public inspection and inclusions, and that there would be no secret votes. The 844-105 just says that unlawful actions are a nullity. If you take a meeting, if you call a meeting, if you have a meeting that violates the Sunshine Law, then whatever action you take there is a nullity. And that doesn't mean that you can't cure that. All you'd have to do is, and I'm not saying this as saying do this and then cure it, but if your action was a violation of the Sunshine Law, as I said earlier, you can have a subsequent meeting and proper meeting and correct that. I would want to point out one thing to you there that I had not looked at as closely as I did when I was preparing for this thing, and I will read that to you because I want to get it correct in the context. It says if you had a meeting that didn't pass muster for the Sunshine Law, any action you took there, any vote you took is void. Except, it says, any action taken at a meeting in violation of this part shall be void and of no effect, provided that this nullification of actions taken at such meeting shall not apply to any commitment otherwise legal affecting the public debt of the entity concerned. In other words, if you pass something you made a legal commitment to have something done and the person did it, the fact that you later had cured it, if everything else about it was legal, that meeting about the public debt, paying that bill would not be affected. 844-106 is something that a few things points I'd want to make on that. Enforcement jurisdiction just says that the circuit court, the Chancery Court have concurrent jurisdiction for hearing these type of suits about violations of the open meetings law, and that any citizen of the state has standing to prosecute those, not just the citizens of the municipality or the county. At the court hearing, the court will have written findings of fact and conclusions of law, and that they will be, you will get a copy of those will be obtained by the city or the county and included in their minutes. The court will permanently, if they find that you violated any person or group of people that have violated the open meetings law, will be served with an injunction to not do that anymore. Also, and this is something that would be very near and dear, and I don't know of anyone that's ever done this, because you just don't find a lot of cities or legislative bodies that intentionally violate the Open Meetings Act. There's nothing in it for them. It's just a good way to lose control of some of your duties, because if you are enjoined from violating it for the next year, you're going to have to respond to the court semi-annually on what you're doing to keep from violating the Open Meetings Act. So you don't have a lot of those that happens. And I had found a couple of cases that had, one of the most instructive cases that I had, unfortunately, is not a published opinion. And all that means is that if you're going to use it, you have to provide a copy to the adversary party, and it is persuasive authority in the section in which it's issued, which this one was, I think, out of the eastern section, so it would not be persuasive. It's some authority in the Middle District of Tennessee. But it's a case called Lakeway Publishing Company versus the Civil Service Board of the City of Morristown. And I only selected the case because it had a couple of things in there that I wanted to pass along to this board that I thought was of interest, would be of interest to the board. And I will, rather than summarize this, it's only 4 lines, that the court in the eastern section of the Court of Appeals of Tennessee said that the legislature did not intend to muzzle lawmakers and administrative boards to an unreasonable degree. It would be contrary to reason and violate the right of free speech to construe the law to prohibit any discussion whatever by public officials between meetings. That's where you get the exchanging information about things that doesn't cause a problem. And then I'll give you the citation of this other case. If anybody wants copies of these, I'll be happy to get them for you. But the case that was saying that the reason that the open meetings law doesn't apply to the state of Tennessee, to the legislature of the state of Tennessee, is entitled Mayhew versus John Wilder. And of course, John Wilder, anybody that's been around here for any length of time, was the lieutenant governor of the state of Tennessee. He's deceased now, but he was the lieutenant governor of the state of Tennessee for so long that the minds of men runneth not to the contrary. And he was there long enough to make a lot of litigation, but that case is the one that cites the reason that the legislature, being a creature of the state constitution, is not subject to the open meetings law. And that's about all I have. I had promised you I'd get you through in 20 minutes, and I think I did about 15. If anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to.
23.
Pardon?
23.
23? Okay. I'll spot you 3 minutes, Commissioner. If anybody has any questions, I'll be glad to answer them or attempt to answer them.
Quick question.
All right, sir.
The burden of proof is on the accuser, right?
The burden of proof is always on the accuser. The only thing that I would add to that is to remember that when the statute is remedial, it's very broadly construed, and my burden would not be as great as it would be if, say, I was challenging the Constitution, because it's strictly construed to enforce the Constitution. But yes, sir, the burden would be on the person that's doing the accusing. Yes, sir. Anyone else? I thank you for your time and allowing me to do this. It took me a little longer than 23 minutes to put this together, but
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, we appreciate it. Thank you for doing it. And that was actually a request because a citizen had a while back wanted, and he took the time. And so we appreciate it. It's always good to have a refresher just to be reminded, and especially if anything had changed over the time. So appreciate you taking the time and,
Well, I wanted to put together
Presenting.
something that would be of benefit to you and not burden you down with all the stuff that I was doing, because it's not the only stuff that I looked at, but, and I thought it'd be better to spend the time on the Open Meetings Act rather than the Open Records Act, because Miss Brandy and I are about the only ones that get beat up with the Open Records Act.
Close the work down.
okay. Thank you. Y'all have a good evening.